The private jet's engines hummed steadily as it cut through the clouds above the Atlantic, but inside the cabin, chaos reigned. 3-year-old Emma Ashford had been screaming for nearly 2 hours straight, her face red and tear-streaked, her small fists pounding against her father's chest. Richard Ashford, CEO of Ashford Technologies, and one of London's wealthiest men, looked utterly defeated. His designer suit was rumpled, his tie askew, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He bounced Emma awkwardly, patted her back, offered her toys, snacks, juice. Nothing worked. The toddler only wailed louder. "Please, sweetheart, please," Richard begged, his voice hoarse. "Daddy doesn't know what to do." The other passengers, business associates, a few journalists, and several first-class travelers, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some glared. Others whispered behind their hands. One man in a grey suit muttered loudly enough to be heard, "Can't he control his own child? Money can't buy parenting skills, apparently." Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. What could he say? The man was right. Since his wife Catherine had died 6 months ago from a sudden heart condition, Richard had been drowning. Between running a multinational corporation and trying to be both mother and father to Emma, he was failing at everything. Emma had been inconsolable since Catherine's death, and tonight was the worst it had ever been. The flight attendant approached with a sympathetic smile. "Sir, is there anything I can—" "No, thank you," Richard said tersely, then softened. "I'm sorry. I've tried everything." Near the back of the cabin, in one of the last rows, sat Dorothy Chen, a 72-year-old woman with silver hair pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a worn, but clean cardigan over a floral dress, and her weathered hands rested on a small carry-on bag. Dorothy was returning from visiting her grandson in New York, traveling on a ticket he'd scraped together for her birthday. She'd been watching the scene unfold with growing concern. Dorothy had spent 40 years as a pediatric nurse in Vancouver's Chinatown, caring for thousands of children before retiring on a modest pension. She lived alone now in a small apartment, volunteering at a community center twice a week. She knew the sound of a child in genuine distress versus one simply being spoiled, and Emma Ashford was suffering. The child's cries had a desperate quality, a grief that Dorothy recognized. She'd seen it before in children who'd lost a parent. Finally, Dorothy unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. Several passengers glanced at her, then away. She made her way slowly up the aisle, her gait steady despite her age. Richard didn't notice her approach until she stood beside his seat. He looked up, startled, taking in her simple clothing and lined face. His expression flickered with something, annoyance. Dismissal. "Excuse me," Dorothy said gently. "May I try?" Richard blinked. I don't think, please," Dorothy interrupted softly. "I was a children's nurse for 4 decades. Sometimes a child just needs a different touch." Richard hesitated. He glanced at Emma, whose screams had grown ragged and exhausted. What did he have to lose? "All right," he said finally, though doubt colored his voice. Dorothy held out her arms, and to Richard's shock, Emma immediately leaned toward her. Dorothy gathered the little girl close, cradling her against her shoulder. She began humming a soft, wordless melody, while gently swaying side to side. "Sure, little one," Dorothy murmured. I know. It's so hard." Emma's screams faltered, becoming hiccuping sobs. Dorothy continued humming, her hand making slow circles on Emma's back. She whispered something in the child's ear, words Richard couldn't hear, and gradually, miraculously, Emma's crying subsided. Her breathing evened out. Within minutes, she was asleep, her small body relaxed against Dorothy's shoulder. The cabin fell silent except for the engine's drone. Richard stared in disbelief. "How did you?" he whispered. Dorothy smiled sadly. "She's grieving. Children carry loss in their bodies. She needed someone who understood. She looked at Richard with compassionate eyes. You're grieving too, aren't you? Richard's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to speak. May I sit? Dorothy asked. Yes, of course. Richard gestured to the empty seat beside him. Dorothy settled carefully, still holding Emma. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Richard said quietly, her mother died 6 months ago. I don't know how to help her. I don't know how to help myself. Grief isn't something you solve, Dorothy said. It's something you carry together. Your daughter doesn't need you to fix her pain, she needs you to share it. Richard felt something crack open inside his chest. I keep trying to be strong for her. To keep everything normal. But I'm failing. You're not failing, Dorothy said firmly. You're here. You're trying. That's what matters. She glanced down at sleeping Emma. Children are resilient, but they need honesty. They need to know it's okay to be sad. I've been so focused on work, Richard admitted. Trying to keep everything running, keep us financially secure. But I've missed her bedtimes, her meals. I've hired nannies who come and go because I'm too demanding. She barely knows me anymore. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, there's still time. But you have to choose her. Not tomorrow, now. The rest of the flight passed in quiet conversation. Dorothy shared stories from her years as a nurse, the families she'd helped, the lessons she'd learned about resilience and love. Richard found himself opening up about Catherine, about his fears, about the loneliness that consumed him. When the plane landed in Vancouver, Richard carefully took Emma from Dorothy's arms. The little girl stirred, but didn't wake. Thank you, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to repay you. Dorothy patted his arm. You repay me by being the father she needs. Nothing more, nothing less. They exchanged contact information, and Dorothy pressed a worn business card into his hand, her grandson's number at the community center where she volunteered. If you ever need someone to talk to, she said, or if Emma does. Richard watched her walk away through the terminal, her small figure disappearing into the crowd. He looked down at his sleeping daughter and made a decision. The next morning, Richard called an emergency board meeting. He announced he was stepping back from day-to-day operations for 6 months to focus on his family. His executives were shocked. Richard Ashford never stepped back from anything. I've been chasing the wrong things, he told them. I nearly lost what matters most. He hired a child psychologist recommended by Dorothy. He cleared his evenings for dinner and bedtime stories. He learned to braid Emma's hair, to make her favorite soup, to sit with her when she cried for her mother instead of trying to distract her from the pain. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and hard days. But slowly, Emma began to smile again. She started calling him Daddy with affection instead of desperation. They visited Catherine's grave together and planted flowers. Richard also began volunteering at Dorothy's community center, using his business resources to fund programs for grieving families. He established a foundation in Catherine's name, providing support for single parents and children who'd lost parents. 6 months later, Richard invited Dorothy to dinner at his home. Emma ran to greet her at the door, chattering excitedly about her day. Over a simple meal, nothing fancy, just homemade pasta and salad, Richard said, "You saved us. Both of us." Dorothy shook her head. "I just reminded you what you already knew. Love doesn't require perfection. It requires presence." "I was so arrogant," Richard said quietly. "So certain that my money and success meant I could handle anything. But I couldn't handle the one thing that mattered. I needed help, and I was too proud to ask." "Pride is expensive," Dorothy said. It costs us the connections that make us human. Emma climbed into Dorothy's lap, and the older woman smiled, wrapping her arms around the child who'd become like a granddaughter to her. Richard watched them together, and thought about that terrible night on the plane, how close he'd come to losing everything, because he couldn't see past his own assumptions. Dorothy hadn't looked like someone who could help him. She'd looked like someone he'd normally dismiss, but she'd given him the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to truly know his daughter. Years later, when journalists asked Richard Ashford about the turning point in his life, he always told the same story, about a woman on a plane who taught him that wisdom and compassion aren't found in wealth or status, but in the willingness to extend a hand across the divides we create, and about how sometimes the people we most need are the ones we're least likely to see until grace opens our eyes. Hello everyone. If you are enjoying this video and finding it helpful, don't forget to support our channel. Please subscribe to our channel, press the like button, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, make sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming videos. We regularly upload amazing, informative, and entertaining content just for you. Your support means a lot to us and motivates us to bring even better content in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and welcome to our growing community.